I never thought a call to the cops could turn into the fight of my life. That's how I should have known it was going to get ugly. But I wasn't ready. I didn't know what was about to come my way. My name is Jake Thompson, and this farm, this land, it's been in my family for generations. My grandfather bought this piece of paradise back in the 1940s, a sprawling orchard that still gives me peace every time I walk through it. It's not just land to me. It's home, it's heritage, it's everything. And now, I'm watching my peaceful world about to be torn apart by someone who doesn't even understand what it means to respect land, let alone own it. I grew up here, worked here, and I know every inch of this land like the back of my hand. It's where I learned everything, from the hard work of picking apples in the fall to the quiet satisfaction of seeing the trees bloom in spring. But I'll tell you this, no one, not even someone with the most polished smile and the biggest title in the neighborhood, is going to take that from me. Enter Karen Wells. She's the president of the HOA here, and she's got a chip on her shoulder the size of a boulder. I'll admit it, I didn't think much of her when she first showed up a few years back. She was just another overzealous homeowner, walking around with a clipboard, ready to enforce rules no one cared about. I thought she was just another Karen. But I was wrong. She wasn't just here to complain about a lawn or a mailbox. Oh no, she had bigger plans. The first time I met her, she gave me this fake sweet smile and asked if I had thought about proper maintenance for the orchard. You should really trim those branches more often, she said, pointing to the trees that were as old as this town. I didn't think much of it. I thought she was just another neighbor with too much time on her hands. But I should have known better. Things escalated quickly from there. A few weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. Apparently, my orchard wasn't up to HOA standards. That's when I first realized that Karen had bigger plans than I'd ever imagined. She wasn't just a petty neighbor. She was out to control everything, even if it meant bending the rules. She sent me another notice saying my trees were too overgrown, that I was violating community aesthetics, and that I needed to cut them back immediately or face penalties. It was laughable. I didn't need permission to grow a damn apple tree on my own land. But Karen didn't see it that way. Then came the cops. One chilly morning, I was out in the orchard, clearing up some fallen branches when I saw a patrol car pull up by the gate. My stomach dropped. I had no idea what was going on. The officer rolled down the window and said, "We got a call. Someone's been complaining about your property." I raised an eyebrow, my heart racing. Complaining about what? You're not following the HOA's guidelines. The president of the HOA called it in. That's when I realized what was going on. Karen had taken her vendetta against me to a whole new level. She'd called the cops on me for violating community standards. I wasn't going to let this slide. Not in a million years. The land had been in my family's name for decades, and I wasn't about to let anyone, least of all some HOA president, tell me how to run my farm. The police officer didn't arrest me or anything, but I could tell by the look on his face that he didn't even know what he was doing there. He was just following orders. As he left, I stood there in the orchard, wondering how far Karen would go to take control of everything she could. I had to act fast. I couldn't let her think she could just walk all over me. I needed to prove once and for all that I owned this land, and that no one, not even Karen, was going to take it from me. The next morning, I woke up with a pit in my stomach. The whole situation with Karen and the cops had been a wake-up call. I had a decision to make. I could either let her push me around, or I could fight back, using the one thing she clearly didn't understand, the law. I sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window at the orchard, wondering how I'd gotten to this point. This wasn't just about trees or property lines anymore. It was about respect, my family's legacy, and the right to live peacefully on land that had been in my family for generations. I knew I needed to act, and I needed to act fast. The first step was to gather everything, every document, every deed, every scrap of paper that proved my ownership. My grandfather's handwriting on those old deeds wasn't just ink on paper. It was my bloodline, my family's history. I grabbed the box of old papers from the attic, dusting off the years of neglect. Inside were deeds, maps, and letters, all showing that this land had belonged to my family long before Karen even thought about becoming president of the HOA. I also had the original agreement from the county, granting my family water rights to the land. That was key. It wasn't just about owning the land. It was about the water that flowed through it. Without that water, her fancy little community wouldn't even exist. As I dug through the papers, I found the deed from 1953, signed by my great-grandfather, a solid document that had been passed down through the years. I knew Karen couldn't just ignore it. She thought she could bully me into submission, but what she didn't know was that I had something more powerful than her HOA bylaws. I had legal documents that went back decades. I called my lawyer, an old family friend who knew the ins and outs of property law. "Jake, you've got all the ammunition you need," he said after I explained the situation. "You've got water rights, the deed, and the land's been in your family for over 60 years. She doesn't have a leg to stand on. We'll hit her where it hurts, in court." I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. This was it. This was my shot at putting an end to Karen's nonsense once and for all. I spent the next few hours compiling everything I had. Every legal document, every photo of the land, even the receipts for the improvements I'd made over the years. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. I was going to use every ounce of the law to protect what was mine. That afternoon, I walked down to the local courthouse to file the paperwork. The building was old, but it had a history. I stood in line, watching people shuffle in and out with their cases. Some were just regular folks, like me, but others looked like they were there for something much bigger. When my turn came, I handed over the documents and the filing fees. The clerk took everything, glanced at the papers, and nodded. "You're in good shape," she said, handing me a receipt. "We'll get this moving." As I left the courthouse, I felt a rush of determination. I wasn't just defending my property. I was defending my family, my name, and my right to live without being intimidated. The next day, Karen called again. This time, I knew what was coming. "Jake," she said, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness, "I noticed you didn't respond to my last letter about your trees. We'll be sending a team out to assess the situation. You'll be receiving a fine soon." "Karen," I said, my voice calm but firm, "I don't think you understand. I'm filing a complaint with the county, and I'll be taking legal action if you keep pushing this." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "You'll regret this," she finally snapped. "I'll make sure you regret it." I hung up the phone, feeling a sense of satisfaction. She didn't know it yet, but the tide was turning. I wasn't just going to back down. I was going to make her regret ever thinking she could push me around. The next few days were a blur. I spent hours on the phone with my lawyer, making sure everything was in order. We had a case, and we were going to take it to court. It wasn't going to be quick, but I was ready. This was about more than just trees. It was about standing up to people like Karen, people who thought they could run roughshod over others because they had a little bit of power. But I wasn't going to let her win. I'd been born on this land, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it from me without a fight. The battle was just beginning, but I was prepared. Karen was about to learn that sometimes the smallest battles are the ones that count the most. It was the following week when I got the call. I had expected a long wait, maybe even some back and forth from the HOA before I saw any real progress. But when my lawyer called me with an update, I couldn't believe it. "Jake, we've got a court date. It's set for next month." I felt my pulse quicken. This was happening. The wheels were in motion, and I wasn't going to stop now. Karen was about to learn that messing with the wrong person would have consequences. That evening, I sat out on the porch, watching the sunset over the orchard. The land stretched out before me, every row of trees and every blade of grass a reminder of everything I had worked for. This land wasn't just soil and water. It was my family's legacy. And Karen? She didn't understand what she was dealing with. I spent the next few days gathering every piece of evidence I could. The photographs of the land from every season, showing the careful maintenance I'd put into it. The receipts for the irrigation system I'd installed last year, making sure the trees got the water they needed. I even dug out the old maps of the land from when my grandfather had first bought it. I was building a case, brick by brick. My lawyer, Susan, was already on top of things. She had contacted the county clerk's office to pull up any zoning changes and property records. We needed to make sure there were no hidden land use violations that Karen could use against me. As we went through everything, I kept coming back to the same thought. Why was Karen doing this? She didn't have a personal stake in my orchard. This wasn't about her land or her property. No, it was about control. She wanted to flex her power over me, and she didn't care about the consequences. But I wasn't going to let her win. On the day of the court hearing, I stood in front of the courthouse, the air crisp with the scent of fall. It was one of those mornings when everything feels just a little too still, as if the world is holding its breath. I walked into the courtroom with my lawyer, feeling the weight of the situation on my shoulders. The room was filled with a low murmur as people shuffled in, taking their seats. I could see Karen sitting on the other side, her perfectly pressed blouse and well-groomed hair, giving her the look of someone who thought they could walk all over you. But I wasn't intimidated. I wasn't backing down. When the judge walked in, the room went silent. I stood up, as did Karen, and we both took our places. Karen gave me a tight smile, the kind you give someone you think is beneath you. I didn't return it. I kept my focus on the judge, who nodded for the proceedings to begin. Susan stood up first, outlining our case. She went through the legal documents, showing the judge the original deed to the land, the water rights agreement, and the photos that demonstrated my consistent care of the orchard. Every argument Karen had made about the violations of HOA rules were based on nothing but her own overreaching assumptions. It became clear that the court wasn't on her side. After a few rounds of back and forth, the judge asked Karen to present her case. She stood up, trying to hold her composure, but there was something off in her tone. She tried to argue that the trees on my land were an eyesore and that my property was hurting the neighborhood's aesthetic standards. But even as she spoke, I could see the cracks forming in her story. She had no real evidence, no legitimate reasons to back up her claims. When it was my turn to speak, I calmly explained the history of the land, how it had been passed down through my family, and how I had worked to improve it. I didn't raise my voice or get emotional. I didn't need to. The facts spoke for themselves. After a brief recess, the judge came back with a decision. Karen's claims were dismissed, and the judge ruled in my favor. "The property is yours, Mr. Thompson," he said, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a weight lift off my chest. The room was still for a moment. Then Karen's face turned bright red. She didn't say a word, just sat back down, seething with frustration. I kept my cool. I wasn't gloating. I had fought for what was rightfully mine, and I had won. As I left the courtroom, I felt a sense of satisfaction wash over me. This wasn't just about winning a legal battle. It was about standing up for myself and my family's legacy. I had defended what was mine, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. Karen had underestimated me, and now she knew exactly who she was dealing with. I may have just been a farmer, but I wasn't about to let anyone push me around. And as for Karen, well, she wouldn't be messing with me again anytime soon. The days after the court decision felt like a breath of fresh air. I spent the next few weeks going through the motions, but there was a new sense of calm around the farm. The weight of uncertainty had been lifted, and I could finally enjoy my mornings again, walking through the orchard without the constant pressure of Karen's looming threats. The trees looked greener than ever. It was a little surreal, to be honest. I had fought so hard for this moment, and now it was mine. But even as things started to settle down, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen wasn't done. I didn't know if she was planning something, but I had a gut feeling that she wasn't going to let me off that easy. One afternoon, as I was pruning a few branches, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out to find a message from Susan. "Jake, we need to talk. Call me when you can." My stomach twisted. "What now?" I wiped my hands on my jeans and dialed her number. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice tight. "We've got some new developments," she replied. "Karen's making moves again, but this time, it's bigger than just the orchard." I froze. "What do you mean?" "She's lobbying with other HOA members to have the entire neighborhood rezoned. She's trying to turn the area into a commercial district. It would affect your land, too. If she succeeds, your orchard and the surrounding property could be up for development." My mind raced. The orchard wasn't just my livelihood, it was my family's history. The thought of it being bulldozed for some developer's profit made my blood boil. "What can we do?" I asked, the weight of the situation settling in. "I'm gathering the paperwork now," Susan said. "We've been through this before. We know the laws. This time, we're going to stop her for good." I hung up the phone, feeling a sense of dread creeping over me. It wasn't over. Karen was back, and this time, she was coming for everything. The thought of my family's land being torn apart for a commercial project hit me harder than I had imagined. This land wasn't just trees and soil. It was memories. It was everything my grandfather had worked for. I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. The next day, I sat down at my kitchen table, the papers from the court case still neatly stacked on the side. I needed to act fast. I couldn't let Karen get her way again. I picked up the phone and called Susan back. "I want to do more than just stop her. I said, my voice steady. I want to make sure she can't hurt anyone else with her power. Let's take this fight to the next level. We'll stop her, but we'll do it the right way. Susan was silent for a moment. You're sure about this? Absolutely. We spent the next few days strategizing. Susan worked tirelessly, pulling up every zoning document, every city ordinance, every bit of legal precedent we could use. I called in favors, spoke to people who had lived in the area long before Karen even knew what an HOA was. Everyone was on my side. It wasn't just about the orchard anymore. It was about protecting the whole community from someone like Karen. She wasn't just fighting me. She was fighting everyone. I knew this was going to be a long battle, but for the first time, I felt ready. We were going to put an end to this, for good. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready to face whatever came next. My orchard, my family's legacy, and my community were on the line. I wasn't backing down this time. Karen had underestimated me before, but I wasn't going to let that happen again. This was the final showdown. The end of the line for Karen's reign of control. And I was going to win. The battle had begun. Susan and I had spent the last few weeks gathering evidence, making sure we had every angle covered. We weren't just fighting to protect my orchard. We were fighting for the entire neighborhood, for the history of the land, and for every person who had been living in fear of Karen's manipulation. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Karen's overreach wasn't just affecting me. It was affecting everyone around her. I wasn't alone in this fight. As we prepared for the upcoming court hearing, I could feel the tension building. Every time I walked through the orchard, I thought about what was at stake. These trees weren't just branches and fruit. They were the legacy of my family, of my grandfather, who had worked the land with his bare hands. I had inherited more than just the land. I had inherited the responsibility to protect it. But Karen wasn't going to make this easy. I found out through a few neighbors that she had been meeting with city council members, pushing her rezoning plan to anyone who would listen. Her influence had been growing, and I knew I had to step up my game if I was going to stop her. One evening, after a long day of meeting with local residents and gathering more support, I sat down with Susan. Jake, we've got to move quickly, she said. If she gets her way, we could be looking at an irreversible change. This isn't just about property lines anymore. It's about the whole neighborhood's future. I could see the determination in her eyes. I knew we were on the same page. We weren't just going to sit back and wait for Karen to make her next move. We were going to act, and we were going to do it on our terms. Over the next few days, I spent every waking hour preparing. I attended council meetings, spoke with anyone who would listen, and made sure that everyone understood exactly what was at stake. I wasn't going to let Karen control this neighborhood. It was my turn to be the one in control. The more I talked to my neighbors, the more I realized how many of them were just as fed up with Karen as I was. They'd had enough of her trying to push everyone around. People were starting to see what I saw, that this wasn't just a personal vendetta, it was a power grab. On the eve of the city council vote, I gathered with a small group of neighbors in the community hall. We were all on the same page. We knew what we had to do. We need to show up tomorrow, I said. We need to let the council know that we won't stand for this. This is our neighborhood, our homes, and our land. The next morning, we arrived early at the city council building. As we walked into the room, I could feel the weight of the situation. This was it. This was the moment that would decide the future of our neighborhood. Karen was already sitting at the front, talking to a few council members, her polished smile on full display. She didn't see us. She didn't see the power we had when we stood together. The council meeting started, and one by one, the members spoke about the rezoning proposal. Karen was confident, but I could see the cracks in her arguments. She didn't have the support of the people. She had only her own agenda. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up and walked to the podium. The room fell silent. I looked out at the council members, then turned to Karen, who was glaring at me from the front. This land, I began, has been in my family for over 70 years. It's not just dirt and trees. It's history. It's family. It's everything I've worked for. And I'm not going to let anyone take that away from me. Not for a profit, not for an agenda. I stand here not just for myself, but for all of us. For everyone who's been living in fear of someone like Karen trying to take what's rightfully ours. I paused, letting my words sink in. This isn't just about zoning laws. It's about standing up for what's right. And together, we will not let this happen. There was a long silence. And then, slowly, one by one, my neighbors stood with me. It wasn't just a few of us anymore. It was a united front. Karen looked around the room, her confident smile now gone. The council members were taking notice. The vote was called. One by one, the council members voted, and when it was all said and done, Karen's proposal was rejected. The room erupted in applause. We had won. But the real victory wasn't just in the vote. It was in the way the community had come together, in the way we had fought back against the overreach of someone who thought they could control us. Karen's influence had crumbled in the face of unity, and I knew, from that moment on, that no one would ever take this land from me. The battle was over, but the fight for what was right had just begun. In the weeks following the council vote, things seemed to settle into a strange kind of normalcy. Karen kept a low profile, which was a victory in itself. But I knew better than to let my guard down completely. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Karen may have lost the vote, but I could sense her resentment building, a simmering frustration that I had no intention of letting get the best of me. The orchard, though, had never looked better. It felt like a small victory every time I walked past the rows of trees, their branches heavy with fruit. It was a reminder that, despite everything that had happened, this was my land. No one could take that from me. But I wasn't just living my life. I was watching, waiting for the next move. And sure enough, one day it came. I was out in the orchard, taking a break under the shade of one of the larger trees when I saw a familiar face walking down the gravel path towards me. It was David, my neighbor from down the road. David wasn't the type to make waves. He was a good guy, always kept to himself. But today, he looked a little different. His expression was more serious than usual. "Hey, Jake," he called out, a little hesitantly. "Got a minute?" I waved him over. "What's going on?" "You might want to take a look at something," he said. "I think it's time we had a chat about Karen." I didn't like the sound of that. I stood up, brushing the dirt from my pants. "What about Karen?" "She's been talking to the other neighbors again," he said, glancing around before lowering his voice. "I overheard her talking about pushing for a new zoning law, one that could get your orchard classified as commercial agriculture. If that happens, they could change the property status, and it could lead to new restrictions on what you can do with the land." I felt a chill run through me. Karen wasn't done. She was back in action, trying to find a way to get around the system, even after losing the council vote. "Is she working with the council again?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. David nodded. "Yeah, it sounds like she's trying to convince them that your orchard isn't up to the community standard, and now she's got a couple of the newer neighbors on her side. They don't know the history of the land like you do." I stood there for a moment, letting it all sink in. Karen was playing the long game now, looking for cracks to exploit. She wasn't going to let me get comfortable. I had to stop her before she found a way to get what she wanted. "Thanks for the heads up, David," I said, my mind already racing. "I've got to take care of this. Don't worry. I'll handle it." He nodded, but there was a worried look in his eyes. "Just be careful, Jake. You've got a lot riding on this." I watched as he turned and walked back down the path, the dust kicking up behind him. I could feel the pressure mounting again. The weight of this fight was never really gone. Karen was relentless, and I wasn't going to let her take my land. Not now, not ever. That evening, I sat down with Susan to go over the new information. We pored over the zoning laws and property documents, looking for any loophole Karen could exploit. It didn't take long before we realized that this new plan could very well be a serious threat, but we weren't going to let her get away with it. We had already won once, and we were going to win again. "We're not going to let her do this," Susan said, a steely determination in her voice. "We'll fight it legally, and we'll fight it smart. We've got history on our side, Jake, and we've got the community." It was the push I needed. I wasn't going to sit back and let Karen turn my life upside down again. The stakes were higher now, and I was ready to go all in. I spent the next few days rallying more neighbors, talking to anyone who would listen. The more people I spoke with, the more I realized that Karen's grip on the community was weakening. More and more neighbors were coming forward, saying they were tired of being pushed around. Together, we could stop her once and for all. But this time, we were going to make sure it stuck. I didn't care how many zoning laws Karen tried to twist. I didn't care how many meetings she tried to manipulate. I was ready for her. And this time, the fight wasn't just for me. It was for everyone in the neighborhood who had been living in fear of her influence. It was time to make it clear that Karen couldn't have everything she wanted, and that I, along with the community, wasn't going to let her win. The days leading up to the next city council meeting felt like a whirlwind. I had spent hours preparing with Susan, gathering more evidence, and talking to anyone who would listen. This time, we weren't just going to sit back and wait for Karen to make her next move. We were going to make sure that the council knew exactly what kind of person she was and how far she was willing to go to manipulate the system for her own gain. I could feel the tension building. Every time I walked through the orchard, the trees seemed to remind me of everything at stake. This wasn't just a fight for my land anymore. It was a fight for the future of the neighborhood. People had been living in fear of Karen for far too long, and it was time to put a stop to it. The day of the meeting, I arrived early, hoping to get a good seat and prepare myself for what was coming. As I walked into the council room, I could feel the weight of the situation pressing on me. Karen was already there, sitting at the front of the room, her usual air of superiority on full display. She gave me a quick, cold glance, but I didn't respond. I wasn't here to play games. I was here to win. The room slowly filled with people, most of them familiar faces from the neighborhood. I could tell by the look on their faces that they were just as fed up with Karen as I was. This time, we were all united. When the meeting started, the council members began discussing the rezoning proposal again. Karen stood up to speak, confidently presenting her argument as if she had everything in the bag. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Not this time. When my turn came, I stood up, feeling every eye in the room on me. I walked to the front, trying to steady my nerves. I had to speak the truth. I had to make sure they understood what was really at stake. Good evening. I began, my voice steady and calm. I'm Jake Thompson, and I stand here today not just for myself, but for the entire neighborhood. This land, this orchard, has been in my family for over 70 years. It's more than just property. It's history. It's a legacy. And I will not let it be taken from me. Not for some developer's gain, not for some hidden agenda. This land was earned through hard work, sweat, and blood. It's not for sale, and it never will be. I paused, making eye contact with each of the council members. I could see the skepticism on their faces, but I wasn't backing down. Karen Wells is attempting to manipulate the system. She has no real concern for this community. She's trying to push a rezoning proposal that will change the very nature of this neighborhood, all in the name of profit. She wants to turn our homes, our land, into something unrecognizable. And for what? To satisfy her own need for control. I could feel the room shifting, people leaning forward, nodding in agreement. I've spoken to the residents, and they don't want this. They don't want Karen's vision of what this neighborhood should be. They want peace. They want to keep their homes. And I'm here to tell you that if you approve this proposal, you will be making a grave mistake, not just for me, but for every person who has called this neighborhood home for years. The room was silent for a moment. I knew I had their attention now. I ask you to consider the history of this land. I continued. Think about the families who have lived here, who have worked here, who have raised their children here. We don't need to change what's already been built. We need to protect it. As I finished speaking, I could feel a sense of pride swelling inside me. This wasn't just about me or my orchard anymore. This was about standing up for what was right. This was about making sure that Karen's control over the neighborhood ended once and for all. The council members began discussing the proposal, but the tone had shifted. They were no longer just nodding along to Karen's arguments. They were listening to us, to the people who had lived here for years. When the vote finally came, I held my breath. One by one, the council members cast their votes. And when it was all over, the result was clear. The rezoning proposal was rejected. Karen's plans had failed. The room erupted in applause. It wasn't just a victory for me. It was a victory for everyone in the community who had stood up to Karen and said enough was enough. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but I didn't let myself get too comfortable. This wasn't just about winning this one fight. It was about ensuring that no one like Karen could ever control this neighborhood again. I walked out of the council room, my head held high. We had won, but the work wasn't over. The neighborhood was ours to protect, and I was ready to do whatever it took to keep it that way. The days after the council meeting were a blur. The relief I felt from winning the zoning battle was immense, but there was no time to relax. Karen had been defeated for now, but I knew her. She wasn't the type to give up easily. I could already hear the whispers in the neighborhood, the quiet murmurs of people who had seen her tantrums and manipulative tactics firsthand. Karen was a force, and I wasn't naive enough to think she'd just disappear. I was still on high alert. It was late one afternoon when I received a call that would change everything. I had just finished checking on the irrigation system in the orchard when my phone buzzed. The caller ID was unfamiliar, but I answered anyway. Jake Thompson, a voice asked. This is David West, from the local news station. We've been hearing some interesting things about the recent zoning decision in your neighborhood, and I'd like to get your side of the story. Are you available for an interview? My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't expected anything like this. What's this about? I asked, trying to remain calm. We've been getting reports that Karen Wells has been making some claims about corruption and unfair treatment during the council vote. She's been going to the media, trying to spin the narrative in her favor. It sounds like she's gearing up for something big, and we thought we should get the full picture. I felt a surge of frustration. Even after losing the zoning vote, Karen was trying to play the victim, spin the story in her favor. She couldn't let it go. I'm not interested in playing her game, I said firmly. But if you want the truth, I'll talk to you. Let's set something up. The interview was scheduled for the next day, and I spent the night preparing. I didn't know what Karen had said to the press, but I had a feeling she was painting herself as the innocent party, the one who had been wronged. It was my job to set the record straight. The next morning, I sat in front of the news station's camera, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. I wasn't just defending my orchard anymore. I was defending the truth. When the camera started rolling, I took a deep breath and began. My name is Jake Thompson, and I've been fighting for my family's land for over 70 years. This land has been in my family for generations, and I will do whatever it takes to protect it. Karen Wells has tried to manipulate this community for her own gain. She's used her position in the HOA to push through her personal agenda, and she's been working behind the scenes to tear this community apart. I paused, letting my words sink in. She didn't get her way in the recent zoning vote, and now she's trying to spin a story that paints her as the victim. But the truth is, Karen isn't a victim. She's someone who's been using her position of power to push people around, to control the lives of the people in this neighborhood. And when she didn't get what she wanted, she went to the media to try to turn the tables. But I'm here to tell you that the community isn't buying her story. I could see the reporter nodding, taking everything in. I've talked to the people here, and they don't want the changes Karen has been pushing. They want peace. They want their homes, their families, and their way of life to remain untouched. And that's what I'm fighting for. I'm not fighting for myself. I'm fighting for everyone who has lived in fear of someone like Karen trying to take what's theirs. After the interview aired, the response was overwhelming. People from all over the community reached out, thanking me for speaking up. It wasn't just the neighbors who were fed up with Karen, it was the entire town. The pressure was on now. Karen had tried to manipulate the system, and she had tried to turn the story into something it wasn't. But the truth was out there, and I wasn't about to let her get away with it. As the weeks passed, it became clear that Karen's influence was waning. The media coverage didn't go the way she had hoped. The more people learned about her tactics, the more they saw her for who she really was. Karen tried to rally the community again, but the support she once had was slipping away. It wasn't long before she found herself on the defensive. The neighborhood wasn't hers to control anymore. People had seen the truth. And when it came time for the next community meeting, Karen didn't show up. She didn't have the power she once did. For the first time in a long time, the community felt like it was in control of its own future. I wasn't sure if Karen would ever fully accept defeat, but I knew one thing for certain. She had lost. And we had won. The orchard was safe, my family's legacy was protected, and the neighborhood had taken back its power. As the months passed, life in the neighborhood began to return to a sense of normalcy, though it was a new normal. Karen had been silenced for the time being, but I knew it wouldn't last forever. People began to speak more openly, share their concerns, and support one another in a way they hadn't before. The community, once divided by fear and intimidation, now felt united. My orchard flourished more than ever, the trees heavy with fruit, their branches bending with the weight of the harvest. But it wasn't just the land that had grown stronger, it was the people, too. One evening, I sat on the porch, looking out over the orchard, the sky painted with the soft hues of sunset. I could hear the faint sounds of children playing in the distance, the hum of a lawnmower from a nearby yard, and the occasional chirp of crickets beginning to settle in for the night. It was peaceful, the way it had always been before everything with Karen started. But the peace was hard-earned. The battle with Karen had taught me more than I had expected about what it meant to stand up for something bigger than yourself. It wasn't just about the orchard or the land anymore. It was about the strength of a community, the importance of fighting for what's right, and the power of knowing when to take a stand. The following spring, I decided it was time to do something that I had always dreamed of. I started a community garden on a section of the orchard. It wasn't just for me, it was for everyone. I reached out to the neighbors, asking if they'd like to pitch in and help create a space where we could all grow something together. The response was overwhelming. People came out, families joined in, and before long, the garden was flourishing. We grew vegetables, flowers, and herbs, and it became a place where people could come together, share stories, and learn from one another. The orchard had always been a place of growth, but now it was a place of connection, a symbol of the new beginning we had all worked for. One afternoon, as I walked through the rows of tomatoes and squash, I ran into David, the neighbor who had helped me see Karen's plan for what it was. He smiled as he worked, picking a few ripe peppers off the plants. "You've done a good thing here, Jake," he said, wiping his hands on his pants. "This garden, it's not just about food. It's about community." I nodded, taking a deep breath. "It's about a lot more than food, David. It's about coming together. After everything with Karen, we've got something real now. Something that can't be taken away." He grinned, handing me a pepper. "That's the spirit. You've turned this place around. It's more than just land now. It's a home for everyone." I felt a sense of pride swell in my chest as I looked around at the garden, the faces of my neighbors working side by side. It wasn't just the orchard that had been transformed. The whole neighborhood had been given a new life. And in that moment, I knew that the fight we had fought wasn't just for land. It was for something deeper. It was for the future, for the people who would come after us, and for the legacy we were leaving behind. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the rows of vegetables, I knew we had won. Karen had tried to take everything, our peace, our land, and our sense of community. But in the end, she had failed. We had fought back, not just with laws and meetings, but with unity, with the strength of a people who refused to back down. And that strength, that unity, was what had truly made us victorious.